Child Welfare Virtual Expo 2018, Closing Reflections. Jill Durr-Barrick, School of Social Welfare, University of California, Berkeley.
Hello, what a day. That was an incredible day. I hope that you were able to share why you stay in child welfare on our virtual message board, and I hope you join the virtual chat in the exhibit hall. As a reminder, if you can't see us, but you can't hear us, just please turn up your speakers on your computer, and if you need additional assistance, support is available at the help desk. A virtual convening. That was amazing, wasn't it? I found the virtual experience fascinating, and I found the content so valuable. I learned so much today. I learned so much about great practices involving simulations to help train our workforce. I learned about valuable tools that our organizations can employ so that we can understand these deep, meaningful issues about secondary trauma, and we can do something to address it. I learned about coaching strategies so that our supervisors can be so much more thoughtful in their work with our staff and can make the meaning of the work so much more impactful. And I learned about data collection strategies and utilization and collaboration so that agencies can learn from their data about recruitment and retention and workforce development. I learned so much more, and I came away very optimistic, but not at all surprised. Not at all surprised because we're a country of incredible innovators, and we have so much going on in child welfare that we should celebrate. I'm not surprised because I know about the heart and the soul that goes into this work, and I know that so many of us are so dedicated to this work that we bring all of our creative energies to child welfare all the time. But I do want to spend a couple of our last minutes together really talking about what do we have to celebrate in child welfare? Because sometimes I know the work is hard, and sometimes it's easy to kind of get down. Well, what are we doing well? What do we have to celebrate anyway? This work is really difficult. I think we have a lot to celebrate. So one of the things that I've been doing over the past 5 years is I've had an incredible privilege to be able to travel to a number of other countries to examine their child welfare system, to talk with their child welfare workers and their administrators and their foster parents, and to find out about how they run their systems, how they organize their systems, how their systems work, how they're different from ours. And you know, the main thing that I've taken away from my experience looking at other countries is it's really only helped me understand our own a little bit better. And maybe that's the great lesson learned. When we go away and we look for something different, what we actually are doing is we're looking in the mirror and we say, oh my goodness, now I understand us. I understand this United States system so much better in spite of the fact that we're 50 systems, 50 different states, many jurisdictions. I know there's a lot of variety out there. But I think, having seen what else is going on elsewhere, I have a better perspective on what we do really, really well. And I think it's time to celebrate a little bit and to really acknowledge that the path that we are on in this field is very exciting. And we only have up as our next direction to go. So I prepared a list, the list of things we do really well in the United States in child welfare. Let me see if I can make that simpler. The top, no. A list of great things we do in the United States. And I imagine that you have a list too. My list is not exhaustive. I know it's just my list. It's not official. It's not anybody else's list. But these are a few things that I think we do really well. I hope that you can take a minute as I'm talking and think, well, what do you think that we do really well in the United States? What should we celebrate? What are we good at? Write it down. Send it into the chat room. Let's talk about it during this session and afterwards, and let's see if we can work together to celebrate together what we do really, really well. So, here's my list. I wish I could see you right now. This is the only thing about a virtual convening. I can't see you, so I don't know how old you are. See, if you were my age, you would know this guy named David Letterman, and he used to have this TV show, and he did the top 10 things. but you may be really young and you may not know David Letterman, so that may not work. So I'm going to go for my Jill's top 7. Are you ready? And my first of the 7 is, what are we good at? Data-informed decision making. Okay, you're not as excited as I am, I know, but I love data, and we should be excited about the fact that we use data in this country in a way that nobody else does on this globe, okay? I think it's exciting. Why? It's exciting because we have the capacity to look at data and understand trends over time. We can look at data and see patterns of inequities where some of our populations are served better than others. We can see when new populations are emerging that need our assistance. The great example of using data in the United States is the CFSRs. What other country holds its agencies to account using data the way we do? I don't think there is another country that does use data the way we do. What other country has developed data systems like ours that are publicly available, where any resident from anywhere in the United States can log on to a website and find out what's happening, who's being served, how long are they being served, how are trends changing over time? That is a uniquely American phenomenon. Collecting data doesn't really have much utility. In fact, it's actually a burden to collect data. But when we start using data and we see the power of it to improve our systems in order to support children and families, then we see that it's actually an incredibly powerful tool. And what excites me is when I go into agencies and I see managers and I see supervisors and I see line staff who are becoming data savvy and who are seeing the power of this tool for understanding their unit, their organization, their county, and their state, and to understand how their data fit into this larger context. It helps them make better decisions, decisions about resources, decisions about emerging problems, about emerging populations and populations that are better or ill served by their systems. Agencies all over the country have CQI units now. That didn't happen 10 years ago. CQI units are developed in part so that we can do better quality assessments of our work. There are places on this globe where governments don't know how many kids they serve in their system. And they don't know whether that number has risen or fallen. And they don't really know why they're there. And I think we should be very proud of the fact that we are so far beyond that, and that we now have metrics, and we have data that help us understand who we serve, how long they're served by us, and we're getting better at figuring out whether we make a difference. So that leads me to my second on my top 10 list. Kind of related. It is our love affair with evidence-informed practice, or evidence-based practice. And of course, these two are similar, but they're not the same thing. The recent Family First Act is this incredible example of a way in which we've actually taken our love affair with evidence-informed practice and we've embedded it in federal policy. That is a very big deal, and that's a sea change for our field. Using evidence to inform our work is also an ethical obligation when you think about it. So think about it. It's one thing for me, social worker, to come to a family and say, I'm here to help, but it's really something very different for me, social worker, to come to a family and say, I know how to help. It's really different if I say to a family, if we work together, things are going to be better. In social work, we usually say the first one a lot. I'm here to help. We say it with generosity in our heart. We say it with the best of intentions. We don't get to say, if you work with me, I know it'll get better. We don't have that luxury yet. And I want to question whether that's an ethical way to practice for much longer. when we don't know if our mandatory services that we require of families absolutely have their intended effect, or even have a 90% chance of having their intended effect, then is it ethical to mandate those services? Ooh, those are difficult questions. So I think it's good to pursue the evidence. I have a medical procedure coming up in a couple weeks, so I met with my doctor last week, and it's the most incredible conversation. He rattled off all these data. He's like, oh, okay, well, Jill, when this happens, these are the error rates, this is the success rate, this is the percent people who have partial success, this is the length of duration of recovery, and this is the minimum and the maximum and the median and the mode and the standard deviation. I couldn't believe it. My head was spinning. I walked away like, okay, I'm good, I'm fine. But I thought about our families, and I thought, we can't say that. We can't say, if you work with me, here are the odds of success. We don't know what the odds of success are when we offer reunification services. We don't know what the odds of success are when we offer prevention services. We believe in those services, but we don't know if they work. So, we're not there yet. We have clearinghouses. They help. They tell us that there aren't very many services that we know work yet. So what am I excited about then? Why am I telling you that this is a success story? I'm telling you it's a success story because we have a love affair with the idea, and we have an appetite. That's what's most important. We have an appetite for evidence, which means we are developing an evidence base, and we're developing it quickly. I'm going to tell you a brief story about a really wonderful encounter I had over this last 9 months, where I saw what this looks like when an agency develops an appetite for evidence. I'm working with a local county in California, have been doing so for the last few years, around their efforts to change their organization, their organizational culture and climate. We're doing a lot of the things. One of the things in the course of this activity is they're really trying to get their staff to become more data-informed and evidence-driven. That's great. One of the things they did along the way was they sent their middle managers to a training program, a leadership academy that was sponsored by the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute. And in this academy, these leaders, these managers, learned a variety of leadership skills, including developing an appetite for evidence. So, one of the managers decides that there's a new initiative she wants to bring to her agency. She wants to change the way they practice in this particular way at the front end of services. And she really knows that this is going to be a significant change for her workers to implement, and it's going to be a significant change for families. And so she realizes, if I implement this overnight, I'm going to have a revolution on my hands. My staff are not going to have the capacity to completely make this sea change in practice overnight. So I think what I want to do is I want to do it incrementally. And I want to do it, let's see, how shall I do it? Oh, well, first I'll look at data, and I'll see what our numbers are of families coming into my system on a day-by-day basis. And I'm going to see that on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, that might be a fine time, because I have a little lull in my data there, to implement this program. And if I do it only on Tuesdays and Wednesdays for just a few months, then that will allow all of my staff to rotate in and touch this new initiative, so that everybody doesn't have to do it all at once. And because this way we can get the bugs out of it, and I can find out from staff, do you like this change? I can find out from families, does this feel like a good change? And so that's how she proceeded. That's great. And then she realized finding out whether my staff like a new initiative is only part of the story. And finding out whether parents like this initiative is only part of the story. Finding out whether it makes a difference to children and families, that's the story. And in order to find out that, I need evidence. And oh my goodness, what did I just do, she says. If my families are only going to experience this on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and all of my other families are not experiencing it the rest of the week, that is a random assignment, controlled clinical trial. How often do we do that in child welfare? We don't do that in child welfare, but we do it when we have an appetite. She called me on the phone. Jill, are you up for it? You want to do a randomized trial? What do you think I'm going to say to that? Of course. The story is important because there's a lesson there. The lesson is that the idea for a random assignment clinical trial didn't come from me, the university researcher. It came from the agency because they realized this is what is important to find out whether something works for kids and families. The lesson is important because as much as it was important to know whether her staff liked it, she needed to be sure that it was going to make a difference for kids and families, and both were equally important. And that's the lesson learned about why I'm excited about evidence and the trends that I'm seeing in the United States that are so important. So those are my 2. Where am I? 7, 6, we're down to 5, okay? What am I excited about in the United States? Number 5, our strong concern for issues of fairness, equity, and transparency. We're finally realizing the long shadow of racism and structural oppression that was built into the foundation of this country when it was built. We in child welfare for decades completely neglected, completely abandoned our African American communities. We completely abandoned our Native American communities. We left communities just to fend for themselves. And then when we decided to change course, somewhere around the 1960s, we swung that pendulum so dramatically to the other side that today we have overrepresentation of African American children and tribal children that is a legacy that is going to take a long time to break. So what excites me is seeing visionary leaders across this country and staff across this country who have embraced this notion that the way we've done business in the past is wrong. And it's time to make a course correction. And so in that, I applaud everyone who's engaging in this effort, not to suggest that we are anywhere near a finish line, but just to suggest that we are on the road to being more thoughtful about issues of race, more thoughtful about issues of fairness, more thoughtful about issues of equity. The only way we change is by acknowledging that we need to change, and then articulating a new vision, and then following the path to get there. And what I see is that agencies all across this country are engaged in that enterprise. Some are in the early stages of change. Others have gone farther. Of course, I realize that. But I think in child welfare, we have developed a collective will that we need a new norm. And now we are more likely to question our behaviors. We question our systems. We examine our policies. We examine our motivations. And that's the beginning of a change that is long overdue. We're not where we need to be, but we're on the road. And I think it's something we have to celebrate and applaud and continue on that path. Related to that, the next area that I think we really need to celebrate, because it is so uniquely American or United States-ish, is our hunger to figure out how to do this work in a way that is culturally humble and culturally responsive. That is something that we have embraced in child welfare, and we should celebrate that. They're related, I see. We're a nation of tremendous diversity, and I see that, and I know you see that as a tremendous, tremendous gift. The families who come to us bring tremendous diversity, and we have to be responsive to who they are and to what they believe. We've been on this path for a little while. First it was cultural sensitivity, and then it was cultural competence, and cultural humility and responsiveness. Even the nomenclature, the language is something that we're still trying to figure out, and that's good. That's good. That's something that we should be proud of. We're figuring this out. We're on this path together, and we're not always going to get it right. But it's a quest. It's a journey. It's an aspiration. And it is something that we do with intensity in the United States that we should be aware of and celebrate. We're down to our last three. What do we do really well in the United States? Well, we love extended relatives. We love kin. We've embraced kin, and we are really a model for other countries about how we can develop policies that are responsive to kin. And we are a model for other countries about how we've developed practices that you need to be uniquely customized to working with kin. Kin are a strength, and we see it in our work all the time. But if I can digress for a minute, you know, it wasn't always the case that we loved kin. It was only a few decades ago that we actually didn't love kin at all. It was only a few decades ago that rather than seeing kin as an asset, we saw them as a liability. And it's important to think about that because it's not just kin where we've changed our minds in this field, right? What are some other ways in which we've changed our minds about our practice? Well, let's see. In the old days, foster parents could never adopt children. Foster parents could never fall in love with kids. Foster parents should never attach to children. We made them sign a contract that said, you may not attach to this child. And now what do? Well, foster parents are the fastest growing demographic who adopt kids in the United States. We love it when foster parents attach and love their kids. That's the right thing to do. What else has changed in child welfare? Well, just a few decades ago, we thought that congregate care was good for kids. It developed their character. Today, we try to limit the use of congregate care for kids. So why do I mention these sort of shifting values around kin and foster parents and congregate care? It's to remind us that nothing that we do in child welfare is static. It's to remind us that we're a socially constructed phenomenon, a system that is responsive to our society as we change. And therefore, sometimes it's sort of fun to think, what is my social work daughter or son, I mean that figuratively, not literally, but what is my social worker daughter going to think is archaic when she's a social worker? What is she going to say, you did it that way? Because if we can figure out now what that is going to be, we will be the ones preparing for the next revolution in our service delivery systems. And that's how we innovate. That's how we imagine. So as we think about child welfare and all we celebrate, remember that this is a road that we are on. It's moving fast. This is a field that's moving fast. And kinship care is certainly the best example of that. We're down to two. What do we do best in the United States? Permanency. Oh my goodness. Do you have any idea how good we are at permanency? Okay, first of all, we invented the concept. That's kind of cool. Second of all, we seek it for kids of all ages. That's kind of cool. Third, that doesn't actually happen in a lot of places. Kids go to foster care and that's an end place. That's not how we do it here. And fourth of all, we're good at it. I have a colleague at Berkeley, Dr. Joe Magruder, who did a study where he looked at a cohort of kids who came into foster care in the 1980s, followed them for about 8 years. And you know what? A lot of them did not reach permanency. A lot of them remained in long-term foster care. He replicated that study in the late 1990s, and he looked at what happened after kids had been in care for 8 years. And you know what? The majority of kids had attained permanency. Only a fraction of children remained in long-term foster care. That was a revolution in practice in a decade. And the reason I tell you that story is not only because we should be excited about the fact that we're so good at permanency and we keep doing that, but it also speaks to how nimble we are as child welfare organizations. We set our mind to fix a problem, and we can make incredible strides in a very, very short period of time. So, we are a nation that believes in permanency. We act on it, and kids experience it. And it's because of your practice. You make that happen. My last one kind of brings us back to our morning conversation and about the principles that we talked about this morning, those principles that are all so important. The last one that I want to end with is that I want to suggest that what we're really good at, or we're kind of good at, actually, okay, we're better at this than we used to be. Let's put it this way, okay? We're better at eliciting parent voice, youth voice, caregiver voice, relative voice than we ever used to be. We honor voice and we know it's important, but I want to acknowledge that it's hard to do. And I want to acknowledge that it doesn't happen in a lot of jurisdictions. We're not where we want to be yet. You know, other countries might have a head start on us on this one, and so we need to run to catch up. You're probably aware of something called the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. It's a United Nations document that specifies that children have individual rights. They have a whole variety of individual rights. One of them is that they should have a say in major decisions that affect their lives, administrative and judicial decisions, certainly dependency decisions like we have in child welfare. You're probably also aware that every country on the globe has signed the UN Convention except for the United States. So in other countries, when they write their child welfare legislation, they do it using the convention as a framework to think about children with individual rights who need to be protected. We don't have that framework, and so we have some catching up to do. So in spite of that, that is something to celebrate, that we have acknowledged that children and parents should be a part of our team and should have a say, and that we should elicit their voice when we do this work. So my list ends with youth voice, family voice, because that's the core of the work we do, right? I mean, how do we know what parents need if we don't ask them? And how do we know how children are faring if we don't listen? How can we work as a team if we don't engage, right? How do we know if we're making a difference if we don't ask the people who we're serving? So let me end by inviting you to listen with me to a seasoned child welfare professional who listened to youth voice. He listened to a youth, and you know what? It made all the difference. Keith Howard serves as the president and CEO of Circle of Care in the great state of Oklahoma. Keith was a foster parent. He is an adoptive parent. And he's going to remind us of the reasons why we do this work and why it is so important. Keith?
Thank you, Dr. Barrick. And wow, I echo her sentiment about today. What an amazing day we've had. Such incredible speakers, all kind of flowing along the ideal of fostering a healthy workforce. And why do we do that? We do that because our business is about lives. Our business is about children. Our business is about families and making decisions that create impact, hopefully for the better and sometimes for the worse. So if we're not fostering a healthy workforce, we're not putting our best foot forward in making these decisions. Today, I want to tell you a story about a young man that really brings this home for me. A young man named Caleb. Caleb was 14 years old when he entered the foster care system, and he entered because of some pretty tragic circumstances. His mother passed away unexpectedly. She was his best friend. She was his protector. She was his #1 fan. A few weeks after she passed away, his father was arrested on a robbery charge and placed in jail. This left Caleb and his young sister without a place to go. Ultimately, this is what put them in the foster care system. Now, to understand Caleb and to understand his story, you somewhat have to visualize who this young man is. This young man, although he was only 14, most people assumed he was 18 or 19 or 20. He stood 6'2", 6'3". His favorite sport was football, and as such, he had the physique to fit that. He was very stout, very tall, and some would consider him somewhat intimidating. Caleb knew this about himself. He knew his peers were intimidated by him at times. He knew other adults were intimidated by him at times. And he began to utilize this as kind of his self-defense mechanism. I don't want you to get too close, so I'm going to intimidate you to keep you away from me. You add to that the anger, the frustration, the grief that he had about his mom passing and losing his best friend. It could have been a recipe for disaster. But then entered a worker who was not so much intimidated by Caleb as interested. Interested in where was the boy underneath this tough exterior? Where was the kid who needed guidance and needed help and needed support? This worker began to ask questions and give Caleb a safe space to live out this anger and this grief. This worker would tell Caleb, it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be mad. If I had gone through what you had gone through, I would have acted the same way or worse. This worker began to give him an opportunity to see that it was beyond his behaviors, but what was the need he was trying to get met through that behavior? This began to open Caleb up to a new world. He was somewhat shocked and astonished that someone wasn't saying to him, hey, act right, Caleb. Get it together. You understand this decision may forfeit the next decision in your life for a placement? Caleb, stop being mad about something you can't change. Or simply just writing Caleb off as a behavior problem. Just another teenager in the foster care system who couldn't get it together, who had anger issues, and moved on to the next kid. This wasn't that worker's approach. Instead, that worker began to dig deeper and try to figure out, who are you, Caleb? What's going on inside of you? Where is your voice? This worker was committed to giving Caleb his voice in the midst of the storm, which is really what every kid in this space wants. They want to find their voice in the midst of the storm. It's the same as every family we interact with. They want to find their voice in the midst of the storm. And as Caleb began to find his voice, he spoke. As Caleb began to figure out that this was a safe place to be angry and a safe place to grieve his mother, he spoke. And he began to talk about his mom. And he began to talk about the memories and the good things. And one of the things he would share was that his mother would take him to Sonic and get him a vanilla Dr. Pepper. So the worker put Caleb in the car and they drove to Sonic on multiple occasions and they drank vanilla Dr. Peppers together. And they talked about life. And they talked about choices, and they talked about decisions, and they talked about the future. And Caleb would share the good memories about his mom and the bad memories as well. Caleb would share the silly things that she did to make him laugh. And in this moment, the tough surface continued to crumble. And the little boy who lost his mama, who now had a voice, began to emerge. And Caleb was able to speak into that. And they would have conversations about hip-hop music and critique the artist to determine who was good and who wasn't. And they would talk about the rhymes and the choice of words and the imagery. And in fact, at one point, this worker gave Caleb his whole hip-hop collection. He figured Caleb needed it more. It was what calmed him down and gave him a chance just to clear his mind to listen to the music. And in all of that, Caleb began to talk about his future. He began to talk about the opportunities he wanted and the things he wanted to achieve. He began to see the child welfare staff not as the enemy or the bad guys, but as people that were giving him an opportunity at a new future. Likewise, the child welfare staff began to see Caleb as more than just a behavioral problem, a teenager in the system who's not listening, a kid just full of anger and rage. They began to understand this is a boy who lost his mom. How do we help him? And so Caleb really could have become another statistic. The statistics that we're all aware of working in this space. But instead, he became a young man who began to speak into that future, and he began to help make decisions, as Dr. Barrick said, he had a voice and he was able to say, this is what I want. And he was able to help choose an extended caregiver, an extended relative that would take him in and be the placement for him and his sister. And he was able to move into that season and explore his grief and his anger in healthier ways as he walked into a new season of his life. See, Caleb, what he really wanted was his voice back. And there was a worker who chose to give it to him. There was a worker who made the decision that if I'm going to serve this young man, I have to figure out how to give him his voice. I have to figure out how to help him speak and share what he's feeling and tell him it's okay to feel these things because the system's rough. It's okay to go through this. That worker was me. And I would love to tell you I had it all figured out. I would love to stand here and say I knew what I was doing all along. I had a plan. I knew how I was going to serve Caleb. But really, I kind of got involved in his situation because of the chaos Caleb created when he first came into care. I got involved because they asked me to get involved with this young man that everybody else was intimidated by. And he was using that to force his will. And instead of going in and being reactive and saying, now Caleb, you got to get your act together. You got to stop this. I just went in curious, interested. What's going on, Caleb? What's going on deep inside of you? And how do we give you a place to talk about that? I began to individualize who he was. And really, that season taught me more about myself and about child welfare than probably any season in my life. And Caleb probably did more for me than I ever did for him. Because I began to individualize every kid I served and every family I interacted with. They weren't just another kid in the system or another family going through the process. But why could I do that? Why could I begin to individualize? I think that begins with a healthy workforce. I was surrounded by a staff and a team who were committed to each other, a staff and a team who spoke truth into each other's lives, a staff and a team who helped pick up the pieces and encourage one another, supervisors who understood the stress, and they built up their team and they built up their staff to make them better at their jobs. I was surrounded by a team who made me better. And what I learned in that season of making decisions for young people's lives and for families' lives is I'm at my best when I'm healthiest. I'm at my best when I'm surrounded by a group of people who care and take care of each other. You see, guys, we got a big job. We got a lot of responsibility. We get the opportunity to speak into children's lives and families' lives. We get the opportunity to make these big decisions and these little decisions at times. And if we're not in a great place, we may make bad decisions. If we're not surrounded by teams who get it and supervisors who get it and leaders who get it, we may not make the best decisions for children and families. And we just can't do that, y'all. We have to be better. We have to give voice and listen and understand and see past the behaviors to the point of need that is trying to be met through the behavior. And it doesn't just start out there. I think what today's been all about and what that season was about for me was that it starts in here. It starts internally. It starts among our teams. It starts within our workplaces. It starts within our organizations and our agencies. It starts at the leadership level saying, it's not okay just to do what's always been done. We have to innovate, but not just innovate processes and programs. We have to innovate how we serve our staff. We have to innovate how we support our staff, and we take care of our people. The very ones on the front line making these decisions for children and families need us to wake up and make sure we're taking care of our people. The very children and families whose lives are affected by our decisions need us to wake up and make sure we are taking care of our people. I get the incredible opportunity to lead an organization in Oklahoma. And one of my leadership principles is simply this: we take care of each other so that we can take care of others. I think that kind of sums up what it means to foster a healthy workforce. We take care of each other so that we can take care of others. I think we can do that. I think we can live that out. I think we can foster this healthy workforce. I think we can do it. And I'm challenged by that, and I hope you've been challenged by that today. Because fostering a healthy workforce creates impact and change well beyond us for generations. We take care of each other so that we can take care of others. Let's change the whole system. Kids like Caleb are counting on it, and I believe we can do it. Dr. Barrett.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you for your invaluable work with children and families, for your leadership in this field. You know, what he says makes a lot of sense. When you do research with youth in care, we ask them, what makes a difference with what do you like about your social worker? What makes a difference? And what do they tell us? My social worker listens, my social worker responds, and my social worker follows through. And what Keith reminds us is that we have to have a healthy workplace for staff to be able to do what the youth are asking of us. So, our last speaker of the day, I'd love to introduce to all of you. Mary Garrison is the Deputy Director of the Capacity Building Center for States. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Jill. And just let me say from all of us, thank you for reminding us about the competing principles that we struggle with every day. And thank you, Keith, for reminding us of and making us remember our Calebs from our own caseloads. So I know everyone will join me in thanking all of you and to all of the other presenters for the great information shared today. So good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Barrick said, my name is Mary Garrison. I'm the Deputy Director of the Child Welfare Capacity Building Collaborative Center for States. And we're thrilled that so many of you were able to join us and stick with us to the end today for the 3rd Annual Child Welfare Expo. We had over 800 active participants attending today, including the people who are attending in groups. And we're pretty proud of that number. Thank you for your interest, which enables us to reach further into our constituencies and our jurisdictions. And it grows every year for us, and that's very, very exciting for us. This brings us to the end of the Child Welfare Expo 2018, but hopefully not to the end of the many dynamic discussions that were begun today and will continue long after this event. I saw so many of those happening in the chat rooms, and that, again, is something that we want to have the conversations continue. I hope you were as inspired by today's exciting presentations as I was. Throughout the day, we've explored ideas, challenges, and strategies for developing and nurturing our workforce. We've heard thought-provoking presentations, engaged in discussions with each other and our wonderful presenters, and packed away strategies and tools to take home in our briefcases and put into practice at our own agencies and organizations. As I was listening to the speakers, it occurred to me that all of them highlighted a theme that is critically important for those of us who work in child welfare. And we heard Keith just speak of this, the transformational power of relationships. I've been supervising staff for over 35 years in one setting or another. And these relationships with the people I supervised or have been supervised by are some of the most longest lasting and most meaningful to how I do my work. In fact, I've seen a clear connection between the trusting and supportive relationships that we strive to build with the children and families we serve and the relationships we build with each other. We all know that building strong relationships among child welfare staff is vital to the work that we do with children and families every day. Without the support, encouragement, and community that we get from our coworkers at every organizational level, we cannot do our jobs to the best of our abilities. Relationships make our work worthwhile and meaningful on so many levels. Current research shows that the quality of a relationship between a child welfare worker and a family and a child is one of the most important determinants of a positive outcome. We just heard Jill and Keith speak to this issue so eloquently, and we heard it throughout the day. Research also shows that relationships also matter for the child welfare workforce. That's not a surprise. We all live that every day. For example, one study co-sponsored by the University of Maryland School of Social Work and the Social Work Policy Institute concluded that high-quality relationships among child welfare workers and between workers and supervisors have a positive impact on worker stress, retention, and commitment to the child welfare field. People work for people. People keep working for and beside other people. It's not the organization. And people are reluctant to leave the people on their team and reluctant to leave their supervisors. Having strong, supportive relationships with our peers allows us to learn from each other's valuable experiences and encourages us to build on the solutions our colleagues may have developed regarding practice dilemmas and potential improvements. And in that, we realize we are not so alone. It seems pretty clear that quality relationships matter in our engagement with families and at every level within our agencies and organizations. As you heard, each of today's sessions highlighted how building relationships can help to build a healthier and more productive child welfare workforce. This morning, you learned how a collaborative team approach to workforce needs assessment, one that builds on the strong relationships among team members, is the best way to identify and address the needs of your child welfare system's workforce. You explored how coaching around casework practice in the context of supervision can increase staff confidence and improve staff performance. Indeed, without the existence of a close and supportive working relationship, effective coaching becomes impossible. You heard how simulation training for child welfare workers can be used to help workers develop and also apply important skills. Through simulation training and the supportive learning that come in debriefing and processing these activities, child welfare staff practice relationship building and engagement skills, and they integrate an understanding of relationships as the foundation for effective child welfare practice. Finally, you discovered strategies for building trauma-informed organizations and staff resiliency, including the necessity of providing ongoing support for addressing coverage and caseloads, promoting empowerment, advocacy, and peer support systems, and ensuring recognition and team building. Through their relationships, child welfare workers at all levels can support and empower each other as they address the many challenges they face in their daily work. As we look forward in our work of creating and sustaining a healthy and stable child welfare workforce, we can also consider how building strong relationships within our agencies and organizations can help to build and strengthen a broader child welfare community, one that is committed to nurturing strong and thriving families. In the end, it is strong, supportive relationships with and within our communities that allows us to work together to prevent child maltreatment and strengthen families in keeping their children safe. To keep this great momentum going, I want to let you know about an exciting virtual event. One Heart Can Make a Difference. It's sponsored by the National Child Welfare Workforce Institute, more commonly called, by most of us, NCWI. There you'll hear how every person in the child welfare system can make a difference when they are emotionally connected to the jobs they do. You'll also learn a variety of skills to help you build relationships with colleagues, children, and families. And this event's going to take place on Thursday, September 20th from 12:30 to 2 p.m. Eastern. More information can be found on the NCWI website. So let's keep today's momentum going into September. Before you log off for the day today, if you haven't already done so, please be sure to share your experience and takeaways on our social media platforms. It's been great seeing everyone on there. Please go to that at this point and continue to share to continue to grow the community we've built here. And please take a few moments to complete our online evaluation form. Your feedback is important to us, and we use it to shape what we build for you every year. So thank you very much for being here, for all the great work you do every day in support of children, families, communities, and each other. Have a great evening and rest of your week. You deserve it.
Logo for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo 2018.